when to say gentle hands and when not to. My name is Jodie Thornton, and I want to talk about this one because no matter who you ask in the gentle parenting space, what do I do when my child is hitting? You will invariably get people to say, tell them gentle hands, or we use gentle hands, or can I see your gentle hands? Some permutation of the phrase gentle hands. And I want to talk about when using the phrase gentle hands is useful for your child and when it's actually slowing down the process of getting them to learn how not to hit other people, right? This is applicable whether they're hitting you, their other parent, siblings, friends, anybody in their life. This is all applicable because what we're talking about is their emotional processing and their ability to choose the behavior that they have. And so we know that very young children in particular just don't have the impulse control that it would take to stop them from hitting just because we tell them that it's not a good idea. But we want to unpack what does that mean for what we do to help them to learn not to hit. And so there's one circumstance in which I think using the phrase gentle hands is useful for your child, and that's where they're not the fact that they're not using gentle hands already is only because they're not thinking about it, right? So if you think about, if you've got a child who's very rough and tumble and they've got a sibling or a friend who's just not as physical, and so they may be being rough with them, but only because they like it and they haven't thought about the fact that the other child doesn't like it, right? In those cases, it's reasonable to say, gentle hands, sweetie, like you're just helping them. You want to imagine if you say gentle hands to them, would they say, if they were mature in that moment, oh, thanks so much for reminding me, right? If they wouldn't say thanks so much for reminding me, then the phrase gentle hands is not going to be useful for them. So as an example, another situation where it might be useful is if a child has not really had a lot of experience with babies, there's a new baby around and they're patting and it's a little bit rough, right? Then saying gentle hands reminds them that the baby needs things to be a little softer. Now, in the case where the child doesn't really realize that they're being too rough, it may also help to demonstrate what gentle hands means and like how rough is okay for a baby or a pet or someone who can't advocate for themselves, right? Might be useful to model what would that look like for your child. But effectively, if your child is hitting because they are overwhelmed, if they are hitting because they're trying to get you to change your mind, if they are hitting because they want you to do something or not do something, if they are hitting because they are angry, any of these circumstances, when you say gentle hands, what that does is a couple of things, right? The first thing it says is that you being upset is not my priority. My priority is making sure that you behave appropriately, right? And obviously that's not what we're saying, but that's the internalized message, because when they hear gentle hands, it's like, but I have a problem right now. I am stuck, right? I'm overwhelmed, or I can't get them to change their mind, or I can't this or I can't that. And so the idea being that a lot of us were parented from a perspective that our needs are less important than other people's needs. And we got there through quite harsh parenting practices. For some people, it's harsh and repeated criticism. For some people, it's shaming. For some people, it's even physical punishment, right? We've got lots of ways where we were very clearly told that we need to acquiesce what's important to us and focus on what's important to other people. And so for us, it's really important that we commit to gentle parenting so that we're not trying to change our children's behavior, particularly when it's not developmentally, they're not developmentally ready to change that behavior. But in general, we don't want to be using harsh and critical parenting approaches, right? And so then when we look at something like gentle hands, we have an internalized program that says other people's needs are extremely important, right? That has been programmed into us through very harsh practices. Because we haven't used those harsh practices with our own children, they don't yet have this that drive or burning desire. It's like a compulsion to make sure that other people's needs are taken care of. And so when we say something like gentle hands, what we're saying is don't forget other people's needs are really important, right? Because they don't yet have that like compulsion to make sure that other people's needs are taken care of. What then that means is, well, you're saying that I can't impact them, but what about the problem that I'm having? Right? And so then what we end up in is this place where sometimes your child will be in a position, I was going to say regulated, but it's not necessarily only regulated. Sometimes they can be dysregulated and they can be really caring about the other person. And other times they can be not caring about the other person because they're so consumed with what's going on for themselves. But in either case, when we say gentle hands, we're basically saying don't let your feelings and needs impact anybody else, right? And I'm not saying that that would obviously be the only thing that we do with when we say gentle hands, but ultimately when we say things like let me see your gentle hands, only gentle hands with other people, all these things, what we're missing is the opportunity to help our children solve the root cause of the problem without negatively impacting other people. And when we focus on gentle hands, we're saying, let's focus on stopping what's going on for you. Let's focus on stopping what's impacting the other person. If we go first to how do we solve the problem, then we don't need to be reminding them about gentle hands in the first place. And so if we look at, say, for example, you've got two siblings. One sibling is trying to touch the other sibling's toys, right? And the other sibling is hitting because they don't know how to get them to stop, right? What we need to be doing first is, number one, getting to a place where we can protect the other child. So we want to make sure that everybody is safe. We're not going to be allowing hitting. But what our very first thing to do after we've made sure that everybody is safe is saying, you really wanted her not to touch your toys, right? We want it, and part of the reason why I want you to say that first before I want you to say gentle hands is that the discomfort that your child has on the inside, the feelings that they're having about their sibling touching their toys when they don't want them to, they are still there when your child has hit somebody because they still haven't gotten what they needed, right? Very rare circumstances where hitting is actually getting them what they need. It is an ineffective way, but it's the only way they feel like they have to get what they need. And so when we come in with gentle hands, we're asking them to take their attention away from the sensations that are going on in their body, when what we want to do is we want to connect what they needed with those sensations. You wanted her to stop touching your toys. Yes, I want her to stop touching my toys, and she keeps touching them all the time, right? And then you're like, did you ask her to stop touching your toys? And maybe they did, maybe they didn't, but I'm just going through a theoretical example. Yes, I asked them to. Okay, so if you ask her not to touch your toys and she's still touching them, can you ask me for help? Right? And so then we go through all of this process. So what we're doing is, instead of saying what not to do, we're going into how do we get the problem solved? Right? How do we get the problem solved? And sometimes, for some kids, they'll pick this up really quickly and they'll be able to replace the behavior pretty quickly. For other kids, particularly if it's a really ingrained behavior, it takes a little while for the neural pathway to be strengthened enough, and the old habit to just wither away neurologically can take a little while for that to happen. But if we keep coming in with this, let me figure out what is it that was the desire that you had before you hit. How could we get that problem solved without you hitting? And then we will replace that behavior far more quickly. So this is basically a process of helping your child to build up emotional awareness and then build up healthy behaviors. So healthy problem solving, healthy communication, right? Healthy asking for help when they're stuck. This is the process that we want our kids to go through. And this is something that it can sound quite simplistic when I explain it in one theoretical example when you've tried lots of things. But in this case, it is actually a realistic thing that you can change. It's not something that you need to wait until it's passed. We can actually make a change here. And sometimes it takes more problem solving than that. Sometimes it takes, particularly if the circumstances aren't very easy, like if you're having to juggle multiple things at once, or you've got a baby as well as two older siblings, or this is a friendship scenario and the other parent has different parenting style to you. Like, there's so many different ways that this can be a little bit more complicated than the example that I've used. But ultimately, it is possible and realistic for your child to be able to recognize the sensations that are coming up for them, connect that with what they need, and solve the problem with or without your help, right? Ultimately, what we want to get to is that they can do it independently. In the beginning, they might need your help along the way. So what we want to see here is, rather than stopping the behavior, we are replacing it with the problem-solving approach. Now, then where is the case for gentle hands? Look, I would argue that in the case where your child is hitting in order because they're upset, or they're hitting because they want someone to change their minds, they're hitting because they want someone to do something their way, I would argue that, like, it's no hands. Like, there's no reason for your hands to be involved in any of those circumstances. But I really feel like if we reserve gentle hands for those times where your child is just being more rough because they don't remember, like they recognize that the other person needs more gentle hands, and they would remember if they could, then I think if we reserve that phrase for those times, I think we're being more reflective of what's really going on. Now, if you have any questions about this at all, please do send me an email. It's jodie@jodiethornton.com. More than happy to talk through any of these aspects. And I'd also like to invite you, if this is something that you're struggling with at the moment, I have a webinar called Helping Children Stop Hitting. In this webinar, I take you through the step-by-step. So we really break down what to do, what to say, how to use your body language, your tone of voice. How do we get to a place where we're really replacing that behavior with something that is healthy and considerate and has consideration for the other person involved. That webinar you can grab at jodiethornton.com/hitting, and that's available for you to jump into whenever you're ready. Thanks so much for watching.